He returns to the fairy's house. She promises him that the following day he shall cease to be a puppet and shall become a boy. Grand breakfast of coffee and milk to celebrate this great event. Just as the fisherman was on the point of throwing Pinocchio into the frying pan, a large dog entered the cave, enticed by the strong and savory odor of fried fish. "Get out!" shouted the fisherman threateningly, holding the floured puppet in his hand. But the poor dog, who was as hungry as a wolf, whined and wagged his tail, as much to say, "Give me a mouthful of fish, and I will leave you in peace." "Get out, I tell you," repeated the fisherman, and he stretched out his leg to give him a kick. But the dog, who, when he was really hungry, would not stand trifling, turned upon him, growling and showing his terrible fangs. At that moment, a little feeble voice was heard in the cave, saying entreatingly, "Save me, Alidoro! If you don't save me, I shall be fried." The dog recognized Pinocchio's voice, and his extreme surprise perceived that it proceeded from the floured bundle that the fisherman held in his hand. So what do you think he did? He made a spring, seized the bundle in his mouth, and holding it gently between his teeth, he rushed out of the cave and was gone like a flash of lightning. The fisherman, furious at seeing a fish he was so anxious to eat snatched from him, ran after the dog. But he had not gone many steps when he was seized by a fit of coughing and had to give it up. Alidoro, when he had reached the path that led to the village, stopped and put his friend Pinocchio gently on the ground. "How much I have to thank you for," said the puppet. "There is no necessity," replied the dog. "You saved me, and one good turn deserves another. We must all help each other in this world." "But how came you to come to the cave?" "I was lying on the shore, more dead than alive, when the wind brought to me the smell of fried fish. The smell excited my appetite, and I followed it up. If I had arrived a second later—" "Don't talk of it," groaned Pinocchio, who was still trembling with fright. "Don't talk of it. If you had arrived a second later, I should by this time have been fried, eaten and digested. Brrr. It makes me shudder only to think of it." Alidoro, laughing, extended his right paw to the puppet, who shook it heartily in token of great friendship, and they then separated. The dog took the road home, and Pinocchio, left alone, went to a cottage not far off, and said to a little old man who was warming himself in the sun, "Tell me, good man, do you know anything of a poor boy called Eugene, who was wounded in the head?" "The boy was brought by some fishermen to this cottage, and now he is dead?" interrupted Pinocchio with great sorrow. "No, he is alive, and has gone back to his own home." "Not really, not really?" cried the puppet, dancing with delight. "Then the wound was not serious?" "It might have been very serious, and even fatal," answered the little old man, "for they threw a thick book bound in cardboard at his head." "And who threw it at him?" "One of his schoolfellows, a certain Pinocchio." "And who is this Pinocchio?" asked the puppet, pretending not to know. "They say that he is a bad boy, a vagabond, a regular ne'er-do-well." "Lies, all lies." "Do you know this Pinocchio?" "By sight," answered the puppet. "And what is your opinion of him?" asked the little man. "He seems to be a very good boy, anxious to learn, and obedient and affectionate to his father and family." Whilst the puppet was firing off all these lies, he touched his nose and perceived that it had lengthened by a few inches. Very much alarmed, he began to cry out, "Don't believe, good man, what I've been telling you. I know Pinocchio very well, and I can assure you that he is really a very bad boy, disobedient and idle, who instead of going to school runs off with his school friends to have a good time." He had hardly finished speaking when his nose became shorter and returned to the same size that it was before. "And why are you all covered with white?" asked the old man suddenly. "I will tell you." Without meaning to, I brushed against a wall which had been freshly whitewashed, answered the puppet, ashamed to confess that he had been floured like a fish prepared for the frying pan. "And what have you done with your jacket, your trousers, and your cap?" "I met with robbers who took them from me. Tell me, good old man, could you perhaps give me some clothes to return home in?" "My boy, as to clothes, I have nothing but a little sack in which I keep beans. If you want it, take it, that is." Pinocchio did not wait to be told once. He took the sack at once, and with a pair of scissors he cut a hole at the end and at each side, and put it on like a shirt. And with this light clothing he set off for the village. But as he went, he did not feel at all comfortable. So little, so indeed, that at each step forward he took another step backwards. And he said, talking to himself, "How shall I ever show myself to my good little fairy? What will she say when she sees me? Will she forgive me for this second escapade? I bet that she will not forgive me. Oh, I am sure that she will not forgive me. And it serves me right, for I am a rascal. I am always promising to be good, and I never keep my word." When he reached the village, it was night and very dark. A storm had come on, and as the rain was coming down in torrents, he went straight to the fairy's house, determined to knock at the door and hoping to be let in. But when he was there, his courage failed him, and instead of knocking, he ran away some 20 paces. He returned to the door a second time, but could not make up his mind. He came back a third time. Still he dared not. The fourth time he laid hold of the knocker, and trembling all over, he gave a tiny knock. He waited and waited. At last, after half an hour had passed, a window on the top floor was opened. The house was 4 stories high, and Pinocchio saw a big snail with a lighted candle on her head looking out. She called to him, "Who is there at this time of night?" "Is the fairy at home?" asked the puppet. "The fairy is asleep and must not be awakened. But who are you?" "It's me." "Who is me?" "Pinocchio." "And who is Pinocchio?" "The puppet who lives in the fairy's house." "Ah, I understand," said the snail. "Wait for me there. I will come down and open the door directly. Be quick for pity's sake, for I am dying of cold. My boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." An hour passed, and then 2, and the door was still shut. Pinocchio, who was wet through and trembling from cold and fear, at last took courage and knocked again, and this time he knocked louder. At this second knock, a window on the lower story opened, and the same snail appeared at it. "My pretty little snail," cried Pinocchio from the street. "I have been waiting for 2 hours. And 2 hours on such a bad night seem longer than 2 years. Be quick, for pity's sake." "My boy," answered the calm, phlegmatic little animal, "my boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." And the window was shut again. Shortly afterwards, midnight struck, then 1 o'clock, then 2 o'clock, and the door was still closed. Pinocchio at last, losing all patience, seized the knocker in a rage, intending to give a blow that would resound through the house. But the knocker, which was iron, turned suddenly into an eel, and slipping out of his hands, disappeared in the stream of water that ran down the middle of the street. "Ah, so that's it!" shouted Pinocchio, blind with rage. "Since the knocker has disappeared, I will kick instead with all my might." And drawing a little back, he gave a tremendous kick against the door. The blow was indeed so violent that his foot went through the wood and stuck. And when he tried to draw it back again, it was quite useless, for it remained fixed like a nail that has been hammered down. Think of poor Pinocchio. He was obliged to spend the remainder of the night with 1 foot on the ground and the other in the air. The following morning at daybreak, the door was at last opened. That clever little snail had taken only 9 hours to come down from the 4th story to the house door. She must have been dripping with perspiration. "What are you doing with your foot stuck in the door?" she asked the puppet, laughing. "It was an accident. Do try, pretty little snail. If you can release me from this torture, my boy, that is the work of a carpenter, and I have never been a carpenter. Beg the fairy from me." "The fairy is asleep and must not be wakened." "But what do you suppose that I can do all day nailed to this door?" "Amuse yourself by counting the ants that pass down the street." "Bring me at least something to eat, for I am fainting with hunger." "At once," said the snail. In fact, after 3 hours and a half, she returned to Pinocchio carrying a silver tray on her head. The tray contained a loaf of bread, a roast chicken, and 4 ripe apricots. "Here is "The breakfast that the fairy has sent you," said the snail. The puppet felt very much comforted at the sight of these good things. But when he began to eat them, what was his disgust at finding that the bread was plaster, the chicken was cardboard, and the 4 apricots painted alabaster. He wanted to cry. In his desperation, he tried to throw away the tray and all that was on it, but instead, either from grief or exhaustion, he fainted away. When he came to himself, he found that he was lying on a sofa, and the fairy was beside him. "I will forgive you once more," the fairy said, "but woe to you if you behave badly a 3rd time." Pinocchio promised and swore that he would study and that for the future he would always behave well. And he kept his word for the remainder of the year. Indeed, at the examinations before the holidays, he had the honor of being the first in the school, and his behavior in general was so satisfactory and praiseworthy that the fairy was very much pleased and said to him, "Tomorrow your wish shall be gratified, and that is, tomorrow you shall cease to be a wooden puppet, and you shall become a boy." No one who had not witnessed it could ever imagine Pinocchio's joy at this long sight for good fortune. All his schoolfellows were to be invited for the following day to a grand breakfast at the fairy's house, that they might celebrate together the great event. The fairy had prepared 200 cups of coffee and milk, and 400 rolls cut and buttered on both sides. The day promised to be most happy and delightful, but unfortunately, in the lives of puppets, there is always a but that spoils everything. Pinocchio, instead of becoming a boy, is persuaded to go this friend, Candlewick, to Toyland. Pinocchio, as was natural, asked the fairy's permission to go round the town to give the invitations, and the fairy said to him, "Go if you like, and invite your school friends for breakfast tomorrow, but remember to return home before dark. Have you understood?" "I promise to be back in an hour," answered the puppet. "Take care, Pinocchio. Boys are always very ready to promise, but generally they are little given to keeping their word. But I am not like other boys. When I say a thing, I do it. We shall see if you are disobedient. So much the worse for you. Why? Because boys who do not listen to the advice of those who know more than they do always meet with some misfortune or other. I have experienced that, said Pinocchio, but I shall never take that mistake again. We shall see if that is true. Without saying more, the puppet took leave of his good fairy, who was like a mamma to him, and went out of the house singing and dancing. In less than an hour, all his friends were invited. Some accepted at once heartily, others at first required pressing. But when they heard that the rolls to be eaten with the coffee were to be buttered on both sides, they ended by saying, "We'll come as well, to please you." Now, I must tell you that amongst Pinocchio's friends and schoolfellows, there was one that he greatly preferred and was very fond of. This boy's name was Romeo, but he always went by the nickname of Candlewick, because he was so thin, straight, and bright like the new wick of a little night light. Candlewick was the laziest and the naughtiest boy in the school, but Pinocchio was devoted to him. He had indeed gone at once to his house to invite him to the breakfast, but he had not found him. He returned a second time, but Candlewick was not there. He went a third time, but it was in vain. Where could he search for him? He looked here, there, and everywhere, and at last he saw him hiding in the porch of a peasant's cottage. "What are you doing there?" asked Pinocchio, coming up to him. "I am waiting for midnight to start." "Why? Where are you going?" "Very far, very far, very far away." "And I have been 3 times to your house to look for you." "What do you want with me?" "Do you want to know the great event? Have you not heard of my good fortune?" "What is it?" "Tomorrow I cease to be a puppet, and I become a boy like you, and like all the other boys." "Much good may it do you. Tomorrow, therefore, I expect you to breakfast at my house." But when I tell you that I am going away tonight, at what time? In a little while. And where are you going? I am going to live in a country, the most delightful country in the world, a real land of plenty. And what is its name? It is called Toyland. Why, don't you want to come too? No, never. You are wrong, Pinocchio. Believe me, if you do not come, you will be sorry for it. Where could you find a better country for us boys? There are no schools there. There are no masters. There are no books. In that delightful land, nobody ever studies. There is no school on Thursdays, and every week consists of 6 Thursdays and 1 Sunday. Only think, the autumn holidays begin on the 1st of January and finish on the last day of December. That is the country for me. That is what all civilized countries should be like. But how do you pass the days in Toyland? In games and fun from morning till night. When night comes, you go to bed and begin all over again in the morning. What do you think of that? Said Pinocchio, and he shook his head slightly, as much to say, that's the life for me. Well, will you go with me, yes or no? Make up your mind at once. No, and again no. I promise my good fairy to become a well-behaved boy, and I will keep my word. And as I see that the sun is setting, I must leave you at once and run away. Goodbye, and a pleasant journey to you. Where are you rushing off to in such a hurry? Home. My good fairy wishes me to be back before dark. Wait another 2 minutes. It will make me too late. Only 2 minutes, and if the fairy scolds me, let her scold. When she has scolded, well, she will hold her tongue, said that rascal Candlewick. And what are you going to do? Are you going alone, or with friends? Alone? We shall be more than 100 boys. Are you going on foot? A coach is passing by shortly, which is to take me to that happy country. What wouldn't I give for the coach to pass by now? Why, that I must see you all start together. Stay here a little longer, and you will see us. No, I must go home. Wait another 2 minutes. I have already delayed too long. The fairy will be anxious about me, poor fairy. Is she afraid that the bats will eat you? But now, continued Pinocchio, are you really certain that there are no schools in that country? Not even the shadow of one, and no teachers either. No one, and no one is ever made to study. Never, never, never. What a delightful country, said Pinocchio, his mouth watering. What a delightful country. I have never been there, but I can quite imagine it. Why, will you not come also? It is useless to tempt me. I promise my good fairy to become a sensible boy, and I will not break my word. Goodbye, then, and give my greetings to all the boys at school, and also to those in the higher schools, if you meet them in the street. Goodbye, Candlewick. A pleasant journey to you. Amuse yourself, and think sometimes of your friends. Thus saying, the puppet made 2 steps to go, but then stopped, and turning to his friend he inquired, "But are you quite certain that in that country all the weeks consist of 6 Thursdays and 1 Sunday?" "Most certain. But do you know for certain that the holidays begin on the 1st of January and finish on the last day of December?" "Assuredly." "What a delightful country," repeated Pinocchio, looking enchanted. Then, with a resolute air, he added in a great hurry, "This time merely, goodbye, and a pleasant journey to you. Goodbye. When do you start?" "Shortly." "What a pity! If really it wanted only an hour to the time of your start, I should be almost tempted to wait." "And the fairy? It's already too late. If I return home an hour sooner or an hour later, it will be all the same." Poor Pinocchio! And if the fairy scolds you— "I must have patience. I'll let her scold. When she has scolded, well, she will hold her tongue." In the meantime, night had come on, and it was quite dark. Suddenly they saw in the distance a small light moving, and they heard a noise of talking, and the sound of a trumpet, but so small and feeble that it resembled the hum of a mosquito. "Here it is!" shouted Candlewick, jumping to his feet. "What is it?" asked Pinocchio in a whisper. "It is the coach coming to take me. Now you come, yes or no?" "But is it really true," asked the puppet, "that in that country no boys are never obliged to study? Never, never, never. What a delightful country! What a delightful country! What a delightful country!"